Good morning, or depending when you're listening to this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and I was always told how to voice radio, so I've made a podcast all about the Pokémon trading card game. And you're listening to PTCGRadio. Now, this week we are in the Easter holidays, and I am painting houses and all kinds of fun stuff like that, but I'm sure I can spare just a few minutes to knock out some lovely Pokemon-related stuff this week. We are going to be talking about the regional championship I attended this past weekend. In a little bit of detail, but I'm going to focus more on the matchups and all of that rather than the specifics of the games. Although, if you've been listening for any length of time, you'll know that I'm clearly not going to be able to resist talking about the specifics of the games. But we are still going to talk about the matchups in general. You know, the game I played against Executor. I'm going to focus on the matchup and, you know, how it's winnable or unwinnable, etc. We're then going to look at a bunch of questions, including, essentially, are speed decks now viable again? I'm talking about proper speed decks. You know, the running through my, deck every turn or two. We're going to be talking about whether Kyogre is in fact any good and whether Groudon is in fact any good. Questions we've talked about before, but I know a little bit more. I've seen a little bit more. I've seen some other players have a go at this, so it's a question we can answer a little bit more thoroughly maybe than we did prior. And we're going to be looking at new ways to play Virizion and Genesect and whether Rough Seas is in fact the best kept secret from Primal Clash. So, starting off then with a little bit of news, I'm going to be perfectly honest with you, ladies and gentlemen. There really isn't very much news at all this week. It is very, very barren on the news front. Now we knew there was going to be an Elite Trainer box for the Roaring Skies set, and we knew it was going to be revolving around Mega Rayquaza. We've seen a picture of it. If you want to see the picture, go to pokebeach.com, KEBEACH.com. You're going to get a bunch of energy cards. You're going to get a player's guide, which is in fact, useless. You're going to get some funky acrylic burn and poison markers, some fancy dice, and some sleeves which will break in about 5 minutes, along with 8 packs of Roaring Skies. If you like Mega Rayquaza, it's kind of cool getting the dice and the sleeves. And regardless, 8 packs is still 8 packs. And actually, if you're looking for poison and burn markers, are about the best you can get. Speaking of Mega Rayquaza EX, there's going to be a Mega Rayquaza collection which is going to be released in this coming June. And that is going to get a detailed swirling figure of Mega Rayquaza, 4 booster packs, and a special holo card of Rayquaza, although it hasn't actually been announced which Rayquaza we are going to be getting, so your guess on that is as good as mine. There's been a bunch of Rayquazas out and about. But as always, we're going to get all of them, so I wouldn't worry your pretty little heads about it. And that really is it in terms of news this week. Now, we're not going to be talking about state championship results this week. We're going to be talking about a few decks I've seen at state championships, a few decks which have been doing well, and a little bit of information from there. But we're going to be talking about state championship results again. Next week we'll have another look in on them, and the Charizard Lounge, I'm sure, will be producing some excellent kind of amalgamations, if you will, of the results that have been coming out. So we will get to them, but that's going to be more of a next week kind of thing. Still in the UK this week, we've been looking at regionals. Our regionals are still going on. There's a couple more coming up, which I'm unlikely to be able to make due to personal commitments, but this past weekend I got my bad self down to Yeovil to take part in the regional championship. And this was one that I haven't been able to I've been able to get to many regionals, but I've been able to get to Yeovil a few times in the past, and it's a lovely place. But actually, this time, the regional happened in a lovely hotel down in Yeovil, which was a very nice venue indeed. They were apparently very strict on your own food and drink, although I flouted that rule and no one killed me for it, so that was nice. And it was just a lovely, quite hotel-y venue, and there was free parking on site, which always makes me very happy indeed. Now, for the regional, I once again, and I did mention this, I think I mentioned it on the podcast last week, but if not, I definitely tweeted it out. Do check my Twitter, @TheWassy. If you're not already following me on Twitter, you're a terrible person. You should feel ashamed of yourself, but I will forgive you if you pop yourselves over there and start following me right now. Go and pause the podcast, I can wait. Or indeed, go and do it while you're listening to the podcast. A surprising amount of people listen to this at home rather than out and about wandering. So make sure you follow me on Twitter if you're not doing so already. And I was trying to make the decision between playing a Speed Donphan deck although this was a different version to the one I was considering in Nottingham, or Seismitoad Excadrill. Now, as I've just alluded to, in Nottingham I was trying to decide between Speed Donphan or a silly deck of my own creation, Mewtwo Bats. I know I didn't invent Mewtwo Bats, I'm not, an idiot, but it was a very unusual list, and I went for Mewtwo Bats, and I regretted it immediately. This past weekend I was tempted by Seismitoad Excadrill, and then I realised that would be a silly idea, so I just went for the Speed Donphan and hoped I didn't meet any Seismitoad. So round 1, I'm drawn against Ollie Barnett, and it's kind of the mirror. Now, my Donphan deck, I've got to give a lot of credit to Tommy Roberts here. We talked through the deck, and he made some we had a bunch of ideas, but really, I've got to give Tommy the props here. It was pretty much his list. My suggestions, but pretty much his list. And it played Focus Sash, which is a hell of a card. That's the tool which, if you got a fighting Pokemon with this tool attached and they would be one-hit KO'd, it takes their HP down to 10, and then you discard Focus Sash. The key thing over other Speed Donphan lists around at the moment, it didn't play Teammates. And the reason it didn't play Teammates was because of supporter line. Now, there was one Corinna there for, a bit of Pokemon Search and emergencies. And one Lissandra's trump card, because in these speed decks, you need to play Lissandra's trump card in order to flip your deck around. Otherwise, you're going to deck out. Interesting fact, 3 of the first 4 games I played today, my single copy was prized. And a very important top cut game, although it didn't actually caused me to lose, which was nice. And the reason was we played 4 random receiver for the S-Seeker. So the general theory was, yes, there was a very small chance you would hit Lissandra's trump card on a random receiver. And of course, the only game I had a supporter drought today, I played that and hit Lissandra's trump card. But hey-ho, these things happen. And even if you hit a Corinna, it's not the end of the world, because you can get a Pokemon, and then you can just get a random receiver to get your Juniper next turn. So it's really not the end of the world. But generally, in most games, it means that you're going to hit a Juniper every turn. You're either going to have a Juniper or a random receiver or a VS Seeker, and a random receiver and VS Seeker turn into Juniper. Now, this was at the expense of playing Teammates. Teammates being the supporter whereby you get a Pokemon knocked out, and the next turn you get to search for any 2 cards with Teammates. Now, that has, and I talked about this on the podcast recently, that has great synergy with Donphan. They knock out your Robo Substitute, and then you get to go ahead and search out your whatever you want with Teammates. And that was a list I liked. And that was the focus of the deck. It was, I believe, made by Emmanuel De Silva originally, who will be on the podcast very, very soon, in a couple of weeks' time. He's agreed to come on. He's a lovely chap. He's also incredibly good at Pokemon. And the whole kind of theme of that deck is, let's use Robo Substitute and Teammates and, get set up that way. Now, I played a very different deck. Still loads of trainer draw with Acro, Bike and Roller Skates, etc., just like the Teammates deck. But this was pure Juniper, with the couple small exceptions I made. But the other thing is, this means that you couldn't play Lysandra. There was no, using a supporter to grab your opponent's active. What we did play was a full complement of 4 Pokemon catchers. Now, this is a huge kind of boom or bust card, as we always know. That's why there's a flip on it. But what it meant was that we could run this kind of random receiver supporter engine. And also, there are very few decks in the format that are really prepared for a turn 2 catcher KO. Generally, and obviously there are exceptions as always, some of which we will get to. I had some weird good and some weird bad luck in this tournament. And essentially, most decks need to use a supporter to set up for the first few turns, so you can't really be affording to Lysandra on the first couple turns of the game. You can use Pokemon Catcher, and that's absolutely huge. So round 1, I'm playing against Ollie Barnett, and he's playing the Teammates version of Donphan. And pretty much the game is decided at the very beginning when he wins the flip, and I start with a Phanpy, and this is very, very bad. Now, another thing I didn't play, it was a very truncated list. It was very, very straightforward. I didn't play any Mr. Mime, and I didn't play any Switch. And the reason is you don't want to be playing Switch. You play Donphan, you switch into a Horloger that has free retreat, or Robo Substitute that you can discard. The whole point of the deck is that you get set up as fast as possible. So you need to play Energy, you need to play Pokemon, you need to play Pokemon Catcher. And then you need to play things like I said, Focus Sash and your muscle band and all of that. But it was, I suppose, the theme of the deck, and I will get onto the game in a minute, I promise you. But I suppose the theme of the deck really is simplicity. No Silver Bangle, because Muscle Band works against every deck. Silver Bangle only works against some. No Switch, because you don't always need a Switch. Muscle Band, Focus Sash, Energy, Pokemon, these are cards that you need to have. We didn't play anything, I say we, because it was Tommy's list, essentially. He wasn't playing it here, but he did take it to 7th place at Ireland Regionals the previous weekend. So it's all about prize denial and speed. Also playing Life Dew, but the teammates version did play Life Dew as well. So turn 1, I start with a Phanpy, I go second, and that means Ollie is going to get the first Donphan. And Phanpy has 80 HP, and all it takes is a Muscle Band Strong Energy, and his Donphan will be carrying my Phanpy on the first turn of the game. And this is absolutely key. Because what it means is, I'm going to lose that Phanpy. Now, if you start with Hawlucha, you can retreat into your Robo Substitute, and they're the only 2 starters you've got. So, it really is a bad thing in the mirror. So he goes first, he gets his first Donphan on his second turn. I'm forced to Corinna for a Focus Sash, and it just really puts me back for the rest of the game. And we lose a moderately long game based on a bunch of tails flips, which was frustrating. At one point in the game, I did manage to roller skate when I was looking for a catcher. I did manage to roller skates for 3 catchers, which was interesting. You draw 3 cards of a heads on a roller skates. And although I hit heads on the first one, the next turn I hit a double tails on catcher, which was absolutely huge. So I lost game 1. Essentially, my catcher flips went against me, but then you can't moan about that too much. It's the way it is with catcher. And it really was going second killed me. I think my version of Donphan was good for the mirror. The Pokemon catchers make all the difference, and with Juniper instead of teammates, it is a faster version of the deck. Faster version plus catcher usually means win. In the second game, I'm in a much better board position, but we run out of time, and with only 1 completed game, Ollie gets the win. And this is going to happen. In Donphan mirror matches, in a best of 3, you are only really going to get 1 game. And the reason is, between Focus Sash and Life Dew and Robo Substitute, you can stall it, and obviously playing Lissandra's trump card to put everything back in your deck. You can stall this out turn after turn after turn after turn. And that's exactly what happened. Round 2, I get a bye, and a bye is very, very good, because a bye essentially, and people keep telling me differently, I've checked it with a judge, I've checked it with the TO, I've checked it with the results of the tournament, and I can guarantee you this is true no matter what anybody else tells you, and they will. When you have a bye, it counts as a free win, but it also counts as a free win against an opponent who has 100% win percentage. So for those that don't know, if you finish on, say, 14 points, then you will be lumped in with all the other people on 14 points. And the way we decide the ranking of those is your opponent's win percentage. Now, people often tell me at tournaments, I only lost to some guy who went 6-0. Well, that's kind of irrelevant. What matters is who you played. So it takes the combined win percentage of everyone you played, and that's your opponent's win percentage. And if your opponent's win percentage is 60%, then you'll be ranked above someone whose opponent's win percentage is 58%, but below someone who has 62%. So if you have a bye, not only do you get a free win out of it, but you get a win, and when your opponent's win percentage is calculated, my round 2 opponent has a 100% win percentage. That is going to rocket me up, and that is very, very good. So, got a bye round 2, looking good. Round 3, I play Sam Taylor in another Donphan mirror match. He's playing pretty much the same deck as Ollie, so I know what to do, and I've got a advantage. Now, I will say I had good luck and bad luck in this tournament. I had some good luck here. In game 1, Sam had 3 Donphans prized. I was able to wreck the only Donphan he had, and he scooped fairly quickly. Game 2, my bad luck came rearing its head. I go second, and again, like I say, my deck is more consistent, faster, catches, etc. I like the mirror match. And Sam starts with very little. On turn 2, he manages to top deck a Donphan and Lysandra, my only Phanpy, to KO it. On turn 3, he top decks a VS Seeker to Lysandra, my only Phanpy, and kill it. And this game goes on, and I don't think I'm going to end up winning. Now, to be fair, and this is maybe a bad thing on my part, I've already told you about what Donphan can do to delay the game. I think there is a very good chance here that what I could have done, and bearing in mind I won the first game and Sam's now winning the second, I probably could have, using Lissandra's trump card, I probably could have recycled robo substitutes and life dew all day to stop Sam actually taking the win. But I scooped and went to game 3, and ironically that's exactly what Sam did. By the end of Game 3, Sam has taken 1 prize, I have taken 5. Sam has 2 Robo Substitutes and a Haulager with Life Dew. I have a full setup with something like 3 Donphans, 2 of whom are ready to wreck. I've got the game won, but time is called. I've got 2 more turns. Sam has 3 things on the field, none of which will give me a prize. And I've got 2 turns, and he's not going to bench anything else. So Game 3 doesn't end, we go to a draw. And I'm feeling slightly aggrieved here, because I've got the edge in the mirror match. I've got the faster deck, and I've got the catchers. And one game I end up with a loss, and the other one I end up with a draw, both of which time is called when I'm in a brilliant position to win. And both the losses in the individual games being down to things that were essentially outside my control. But like I say, maybe against Sam, I could have made Game 2 last longer and got on the win that way. Round 4, I am drawn against Kristen Gregory, and yes, it is a third Donphan mirror match. I'm not joking. By round 4 of the tournament, including a bye, I had only played Donphan mirror matches, which is just utterly absurd. But these things happen. I think there was 6 Donphan there on the day, but hey-ho. Now, Kristen's playing another kind of Donphan deck, but here, it was... the game started very, very badly. I lost the flip for the 3rd time, so in all 3 Donphan mirror matches, I'm going second. I have a complete dead draw. I play my random receiver, and it grabs me a Lissandra's trump card. 1 in 6 chance of that happening. This is all going very, very badly, during which I've got a Fampi and an Acrobike in my hand. I Acrobike to see a strong energy and a muscle band, and I just bench the Fampi, attach the strong energy and the muscle band, discarding nothing with the Acrobike. And I do it so fast that although my opponent maybe could have seen what I did it so fast I had no right to expect her to see that. So a judge gets called, and I get, completely fairly I should add, a prize card penalty for essentially a serious gameplay error. And it was a serious gameplay error on my part. I can't argue against that. So I'm sitting there, and I think it's turn 9, and I'm not exaggerating, I counted. It's turn 9 that I finally see a random receiver for a Juniper. The good news is, during this time, I had hit a heads on Pokemon Catcher. And I'm able to bring up a Fampi, and Kristen is not drawing her energy very well here. And I'm actually able to bring this out in order to get, to delay enough to get set up. Now, bearing in mind at this stage, I'm 1-1-1, and I know that 4-1-1 is going to be the cutoff, or it's incredibly likely to be the cutoff for cut. So I know nothing less than a win here, and I'm out of cut. And as Kristen is going for Worlds, I didn't tell her this at the time, but I'd already decided that because I wasn't worried about my Worlds invite, if it had gone to a draw, I was going to give her the win because she was still fighting for that Worlds invite. So I'm sitting here and nothing's happening, and I finally start getting set up, and I play this a little bit differently. She's not drawing her energy very well, partly because I'm not taking KOs and she's relying on teammates. So what I decided to do was not kill the Robo Substitutes. Now, one of the reasons I took this tactic rather than in the other games is because against Sam and Ollie, they often had 1 Robo Substitute down, and I would kill it to force them to put attackers up. And like I say, it worked. I won 2 of the 4 games that we were playing. 3 of the 5 games we were playing, or at least I would have had they gone out. But even so, the series wasn't going my way. So against Kristen, what I'm deciding to do is essentially stop her setting up by not giving her access to teammates, and I build up Donphans on the bench until I'm ready to wreck. Now, at one point, she leaves a Haulager active that I'm able to kill, and I don't have to waste a catcher. And this is pretty big at this stage. And she had Robo Substitutes on the bench, so I'm not entirely sure whether that was a misplay or what. But the key is, I'm able to get a KO on the Haulager, and when you add that to the initial KO I got from the Fampi, which I'd captured way back when, I'd taken 2 prizes. And this is where I hit pretty much my last real good luck of the tournament. And I feel very sorry for this. Now, there was one turn against Sam where I desperately needed a catcher heads in Game 2, probably to finish it, in Game 3, to finish it earlier and probably end up winning the series. And in the game against Sam, I'm able to draw 4 catchers in 1 turn and hit not a single heads. Against Kristen here, we're in Game 1, and I'm actually able to hit 4 catcher heads in 5 turns without using Lysandra's trump card. I hit a catcher heads 4 out of 5 turns, and I'm able to take the win, which is a little bit scummy. Now, it only occurred to me like 3 rounds later that me and Kristen only ever actually played 1 game. Now, to be fair, we finished this game 5 minutes before time was called. There's no way we were going to get a second game, so it was essentially a moot point. But we finished the one game, we both signed the slip and walked off, and then it only occurred to me afterwards that we'd left before time was called. Hey-ho. So I'm sitting there at 1-1-1 after 3 Donphan mirror matches, feeling like my deck is running beautifully, my catcher flips are not going that well, but I knew that was going to happen. And knowing that I need to win the next 2 games in order to get myself into Top Cup. So feeling okay, and just desperately hoping I don't hit a Seismitoad. So round 5, I'm against a lovely chap called Shyam, and he's playing Night March. And I love Night March, because Night March cannot keep up with Speed Donphan. Either they don't attack with Mew, and you're taking a prize every turn, and they're only taking a prize when they Lysandra, or they do use Mew, and you're getting either 2 prizes every turn or every other turn, and they're again only taking prizes when they Lysandra. Game 1, I draw absolutely dead, and he beats me in 3 turns. Game 2 and 3 go exactly the same. With a combination of Life Dew, Focus Sash, and Robo Substitute, he takes 1 prize over both the games, and I wrap it up very, very quickly. But it's a very favourable matchup for Donphan against Night March. By using Donphan to kind of switch to the bench, you can take prizes and stick up Robo Substitute, and using Life Dew and Focus Sash, you can even attack, and he was using Mew a lot to attack here, because that's the way his deck ran. You can use your Horlogers to attack the Mew, knowing you're not giving up a prize the following turn. And like I say, the one prize he took was the one Lysandra he was able to use. So going into round 6, I know I've got to win and I'm in cut, draw and lose and I'm out. And I'm playing a lovely chap who I'd never met before called Chris Debaut, who I very much hope to be seeing again in the future, because, as previously mentioned, he was a lovely chap. And he was playing Executor. But considering the opponents I could have played at 3-1-1, there were multiple Seismitoads, and there was a Kyogre deck, and essentially this was, although not a brilliant matchup for me, it was by far the best matchup I could have had. So I suppose that was a little bit of good luck as well. It was a bit of a good luck, bad luck tournament, I suppose. And he's playing Executor. Now, the key with Donphan against Executor is get a couple of Donphan set up. You don't even really need Robo Substitutes, although obviously they help a lot. But the key is you get a couple of Donphan set up, and then, because Executor, for those that don't know, it supporter locks you. So it hits for 10 damage, 30 with the Muscle Band, and then it stops you playing supporters the following turn. And then they use, like Seismitoad Slurpuff, they use a combination of Crushing Hammer, Enhanced Hammer, Laser, etc. to screw you up. But if you get a couple of Donphan set up, then unless they hit heads on Laser, or you draw dead on energy, and I was playing a list with 4 fighting, 4 strong, which is more than a lot of Speed Donphan lists are playing, you're going to be okay. Because they're going to hit you for 30, a maximum of 60 with Laser, Verbank, bearing in mind, of course, I'm playing Fighting Stadium so I can counter it occasionally, and I'm playing Acrobike and Roller Skate, so I've got a little bit of non-supporter draw there to help me out. He's going to hit me for a maximum of 60, and then my Donphan's going to go to the bench. So he's 3-hit KOing my Donphans. And I'm 2-hit KOing his Executors. Well, unless I've got no Muscle Band, no Strong Energy, but I'm probably going to have one of them, and that's how it worked out. So I'm doing 60 damage to his 100 HP Executor. So I'm doing 1-hit, and you're never going to get a 1-hit KO, because you need 2 Strong Energy and a Muscle Band, and he plays Enhanced Hammer. It's not going to happen. So I'm 2-hit KOing his Executors, he's 3-hit KOing, usually at best, my Donphans, and he doesn't, in the whole game, he doesn't hit a heads on Laser with me then hitting a tails. He hits more than 50% of his Crushing Hammers and all of that, but that's not the end of the world because I was able to keep my energy. Now, the interesting thing here is that there were a couple of times I broke the supporter lock and didn't play a supporter. Because when I was playing against Executor, it's not about running through your deck, it's about, have I got attackers, have I got energy? And as long as I've got those 2 things, I'm going to be okay. So there were a couple of turns, annoyingly, where I'd have 2 energy in hand, and a Muscle Band, because obviously he was playing Startling Megaphone as well. So what I actually ended up doing was not Junipering, even though I knew I wasn't supporter locked, but would be next turn, because I had 2 energy and a Muscle Band in hand, so even if he gets rid of my energy, I'm still attacking. And both games went like this, and they both turned into fairly comfortable wins, I would say. It wasn't easy by any stretch of the imagination, but he didn't hit crazy on his flips. He hit all right, but he didn't hit crazy on the flips. And I was able to just get a couple of Donphan set up each game, because I've got at least one turn with my supporters. And like I say, it is a very fast deck. So I'm able to get a couple of Donphans at least set up every game, and I'm able to get a steady stream of energy, and I'm able to get the win. So I'm able to make top 8 in 5th seed, and I'm playing against Adrian Diguez and his Landorus Bats deck. And this is another chap I hadn't met before, but a lovely chap who I very much hope to see and play against again. And now this game was recorded and will be up on my YouTube channel in the foreseeable future. I've been uploading the games from Yeovil Regionals. Easter Holidays is throwing a spanner in the works, but tonight or tomorrow you'll be getting round 7, which shows Donphan Trevenant against Evil Tau Seismitoad, and then the 3 Top Cut games are coming soon. After that, there were games recorded at Yeovil Regionals, so I should be able to get the footage from them. So when I finished uploading the Nottingham Regionals games, you should be getting Yeovil Regionals. And as always, make sure you check my YouTube channel. Just search PTCG Radio on YouTube, or Google PTCG Radio YouTube, and you'll find them nice and easily. So I'm playing against Landorus Bats, and unfortunately, I would like to think both good players. I would like to think both good decks. And it really came down to Super Scoop Up versus Pokemon Catcher. He needed his Super Scoop Ups to hit because I was 2-hit KOing his Landoruses using Horlicher and Donphan. And he had to use Jirachi, so I was 1-hit KOing his Jirachi. So he needed Super Scoop Ups to stop me taking prizes, and I needed him to hit my Pokemon Catchers. Because if I don't hit my catchers, he can just play around, put stuff to his bench, and I'm not taking prizes. And unfortunately, over the 2 games we played, he missed either 1 or 0 Super Scoop-Ups. I can't remember. You'll see it on the stream, so you know I'm not lying. And I believe I hit 1 Pokemon Catcher in the game, but unfortunately it was one I was unable to do. I missed the card I needed to 1-hit KO his Jirachi, and he just Super Scooped up. Now, I was playing Scoop Up Cyclone, which was an excellent choice of A-Spec, but unfortunately, and I did have to adjust my playing style slightly because there's no point me running through my deck and trump carding constantly if he's playing Scoop Up Cyclone, because I'm allowing him to basically recycle his Scoop Up Cyclone, and that's not going to do me any good. It's Super Scoop Up without a flip for those that have forgotten. So unfortunately, I finish in top 8, he hits his Super Scoop Ups, I don't hit my Pokemon Catchers, and that really is the difference in the game. It's as simple as that. There's a tense moment in game 1 where I'm about to deck out, I take 2 prizes, and one of them is Lyssandra's trump card. So, because it was prized. So I'm able to save myself on the turn. I draw my very last card. But unfortunately, in both games, I think I got down to 1 prize both games. I got very close both games. But he hit too many Super Scoop-Ups. I hit too few Pokemon Catchers. And it was as simple as that. It's annoying that so many of my games came down to flips. But then again, I played a deck with 4 Pokemon Catchers. So can't really complain. But yeah, lost in top 8. And unfortunately, as much as I hate to say this, it was on flips. But it was also to a very good player who had a very good deck and played it incredibly well. So, you know, he put himself in a position that if the flips went his way, he won. As did I. The flips went his way. He won. Simple as that. Tournament in the end won by Virizion Genesect, and really not a huge amount of Seismitoad around. We'll get to that in a minute. So one thing I wanted to talk about today is the rise of speed decks. Now, my Donphan deck essentially played 4 Acrobike, look at the top 2 cards of your deck, put 1 in your hand, discard the other. 4 roller skates, flip a coin if heads, draw 3 cards. And as I've said, with a couple of small exceptions, the supporter line was basically 4 random receiver, 4 Juniper, 4 VS Seeker, because I want to draw my Junipers. It's as simple as that. The other thing I did in my deck was I'm playing a bunch of energy, but not too many, and I'm playing a minimum amount of Pokemon. I'm essentially playing cards that I can play, so that I can run through my deck, and then Juniper, so that I'm more likely to hit my, so that when I've run through some stuff, I'm more likely to hit it in future. It helps a lot. And it's got me thinking about speed decks, because this is a very similar engine to what a lot of the Executor decks are playing. Now, the Executor decks generally aren't playing the Trainer Draw, because they're playing your Crushing Hammer, your Enhanced Hammer, your Laser, etc. But they're, again, generally playing, I know Tamal Cameron's list, I believe, looks a little bit like this, the 4 Juniper, 4 VS Seeker, 4 Random Receiver. The theory being, I'm going to, every turn, play my hand, Juniper, play my hand. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go through all game, and then when I get to the end, and this is a key card for these speed decks, Lysandra's trump card. This card, I should say, has allowed people to play decks like the Executor and Donphan decks I've just told you about, which essentially you run through your entire deck in a couple of turns, and then you trump it all back in and off you go again. And because some of these decks are playing Trainer Draw, you can actually Lysandra's trump card, and then you can Acro Bike or Roller Skates or even play Bicycle in order to, use trump card and then draw more cards again. It really is, and you can make some incredibly fast decks with this, and I will at some point. And timing is going to be an issue with all these other videos I'm trying to upload. But at some point I will put my Speed Donphan deck up on the interweb so you can kind of see how it's built. Now, these weren't the only two speed decks we saw this weekend. A lovely chap called Joe was playing a Florges deck, very similar kind of list. And whilst chatting to him about it, and the question he asked me, which I thought was an excellent question to ask, what are you digging for? We were talking about the engines of our decks and how we had very similar engines, lots of Trainer Draw, only really playing Juniper as our supporters. And the question he asked me was, what were you digging for? I.e., well, you're playing this deck, you're playing really fast, you must not be playing fast for the sake of it, you must be playing a deck where you need to hit certain cards. And essentially what I told him was, damage multipliers and catchers. I want my strong energy, muscle band fighting stadium to multiply the damage, or add to the damage, I suppose, is more accurate. And I'm looking for my Pokemon catchers to draw their Pokemon active. And like I say, there was one turn against Sam Taylor, although they all came up tails, I was able to go through my deck to the stage. I drew 4 Pokemon catcher in one turn. He was telling me it was essentially Max Potion. Now, he was playing Florges, the fairy Pokemon that does more energy for the Pokemon on your bench for 2 energy. And he was playing it with the Geomancy Xerneas, and for a turn or 2 he Geomancies, and then the whole game it's essentially, and I believe there's a couple of Aromatisse in there as well to move the energy around, and then all he's basically doing is he's searching through his deck for Max Potion. And he's playing such a fast deck that he can essentially hit Max Potion every turn, and then just trump card everything back in. And that's ingenious. It's a very simple, it's kind of like your Aromatisse deck, but it's very, very simple. It's just Florges, Xerneas, Aromatisse. You get energy on with Xerneas, you move the energy around with Aromatisse, and then you've got your Max Potion. And because you're playing such a simple deck, and again, this fits what I said about my Donphan deck, it's simplicity. It's an awful lot of the Donphan deck I wrote out was one of the shortest deck lists I've written in ages. Just loads of 4-offs. And the same thing with Joe's deck. He's running, a few Xerneas, and he's running, I'm assuming, 4 Florges and maybe a 2-2 or a 3-3 Aromatisse line. I didn't see his exact list, I'm afraid. A bunch of energy, and then every turn, he can afford to just play some Trainer Draw to get set up, which helps, because he's going to get his Aromatisse set up like turn 2 every game, judging by what I saw. And he's able to hit Max Potion every turn. Imagine playing against an Aromatisse deck that's so fast they always hit their Max Potion. The other deck I saw was again Tommy Roberts, a chap who essentially built my Donphan deck for me. But he played it with Manectric, and that was a Plasma Kyurem and a couple of Cadeo in. I'm not going to say too much about the deck because it's his baby, although I might well steal this one for my next tournament. But it was a similar kind of idea. I'm going to use Manectric, and I am going to use Mega Manectric, and as soon as I'm set up, I'm hitting for 110 and attaching 2 cards on the bench. I'm running a 4-4 Manectric line. I'm playing 4 of the Spirit Link, so I'm going to get a turn 2 Manectric with the Spirit Link, Mega Manectric I should say, with the Spirit Link, pretty much every game, because my deck is that gosh darn consistent. And it's genius. Now, don't get me wrong, these decks aren't so good, the Donphan isn't so good against Toad, maybe Tommy's is, more on that in a second. But you essentially just get set up so fast, and the key here is simplicity. Donphan, I'm setting up Donphaz and Hawlucha and using Catcher to bring his stuff active, and that's about it. The Florges deck of Joe's that I just told you about, I'm setting up Florges, and maybe I'm not one-hit KOing you, but I'm max potioning every turn. Same thing with this Manectric. I'm hitting 110, I'm attaching to the bench, and the key to Tommy's deck was Rough Seas, which brings me on to my next question. Is Rough Seas the best kept secret from Primal Clash? And clearly, I think the answer here is yes. This card is absurd, and I saw it being played in Kyogre decks as well. More on Kyogre in a moment. But this card is absolutely absurd. There is nothing more depressing. Let's say you hit a Mega Manectric for 180, and then on its next turn it goes down to 150, and then 120, then 90, then 60, then 30, and then 6 turns later, all the damage you've done is gone. And you're not going to be hitting it for 180 every turn. You're probably going to be hitting it for less. So you're not doing, so it's really, really hard to actually kill any of this. And same thing with Primal Kyogre in the Kyogre decks. Rough Seas, if you don't know, allows you to heal 30 damage from each of your water or electric Pokemon every turn. And that's just it. It's amazing. Now, one of my friends at the weekend, I shan't name who, actually told me that they were surprised because they thought it was really, really good. And then they realised that it's all of your water or lightning Pokemon, not just one that you get to choose. It is an utterly insane healing card. And it's a stadium. It's crazy good. And Tommy actually was the top seed going into top 8. He unfortunately fell in top 4 to Adrian Diguez. So, when I talk about the flips in our game, I don't want to play down how good a player he was and how good his deck was. He made it to the final of the regional, unfortunately losing to Adam Hawkins' VirGen. Speaking of which, congratulations to Adam Hawkins for winning. So, this Rough Seas is... Now, it's not good for everything. In Seismitoad decks, you really need to be running Burbank City Gym, but Seismitoad decks rely on laser to build up the damage because you don't hit enough. But in so many other decks, it's a potion on all of your Pokemon every turn. It's kind of hard for me to put into words in a way that really does it justice on this podcast, quite how good Rough Seas can be. But let's say you're playing against a Seismitoad deck, and this is what I was talking about with Tommy's deck maybe being quite good against Seismitoad. Now it relies on getting set up. But let's say I get 2 Mega Manectric out, and again, this deck is super fast, so this is possible. My opponent, best case scenario, hits me for 60 including laser. I retreat to the other Mega Manectric and heal 30 off. So he hits me for 60, so I heal the active Manectric to 30 the following turn. The bench Manectric is now down to 0 damage, and I go up and I hit for 110. What's that? He's playing Crushing Hammers. It makes no difference if he's playing Crushing Hammers, because Mega Manectric is attaching to the other one on the bench. So we're going to talk a little bit about Toad counters at the end, but these kind of speed Mega Manectric is maybe a deck that can hold up. Because as soon as you've got 2 Mega Manectrics out, unless they're constantly hitting heads on laser and you're hitting tails, not only are you hitting for 110 and they're hitting for 60, but you are healing, and that helps. And yeah, I know Toad's a water Pokemon and can heal, but you're going to go to the bench and heal entirely, and they're going to heal 30 and still have 80 damage on them, whereas you're essentially healing entirely every 2 turns. Every time a Manectric attacks, it should be on 0 damage. So it really is quite impressive. Now, I'm not saying it's best deck in format. It's got plenty of problems. Do not go playing this at States and telling me, oh, you said it was amazing. I'm not saying it's amazing. I'm saying I like the deck, and I'm using it to illustrate 3 things. Number 1, speed decks are properly viable now, and that's quite fun. Number 2, Rough Seas is insane. And number 3, Toad has got a lot of counters. And we're going to get onto more on that in a minute. Another question I wanted to have a quick gander at today, is Kyogre any good? And I think I've come to the conclusion that yes, it is. Now, there are a couple of Kyogres at the weekend. Jack Stewart Armstead unfortunately lost in the final round of Swiss to not make it into top 8. But he played Kyogre, and essentially the attack does a huge amount of damage, and you got 240 HP and you play Rough Seas. Takes a lot to take him down. Now, it's vulnerable early game, and it's got a bad Virizion and Genesect matchup, although Jack did beat a Virizion and Genesect. But against something like Toad, what are they really going to do? It's going to take them ages to kill you, and you're playing Rough Seas, and they're destroying you with a really heavy attack. Now, you can also, you can't get it going turn 2, because it takes 4 energy attachments. You can only take 3, you can only do 3 in the first 2 turns, 1 turn 1 and 2 turn 2, using the ancient trait, but still, it's rather a powerful deck. Now, I'm going back to what I said last week. I think Kyogre is maybe destined for great things, although whether it's ever going to really reach its potential before Rayquaza comes and blows out the format, we shall see. Maybe Kyogre will then be a little bit slow. But the thing about Kyogre is, it's got a really good attack, it's got huge HP, it can abuse Rough Seas, and it's got a good match against... It's got a good matchup, I should say, against Seismitoad. So in today's current format, what really else do you want? Now, the attack, I should point out, it attacks the water colourless, so you cannot use a double colourless energy, otherwise that would be amazing, because what you'd be able to do is attach one turn, and then the second and a DCE the second, and going on turn 2. But it does 150 damage, plus 30 damage to each benched EX, so once you get going, that's pretty beastly. Not to mention the fact that if you're playing against Seismitoad, you're doing 30 to all the Seismitoads, bringing them down to 150 HP, which is how much damage Kyogre does. Not only that, but Primal Kyogre only really needs energy, and as soon as you've got energy down, you're off and going. Now, you need to have a blocker, like maybe the Legendary Treasures Kyurem with Outrage, to, buy yourself enough turns to get set up properly. But quite frankly, this is a very interesting deck, and I don't think we've seen the last of it, and I don't yet think we've seen the best of it. I think there are better lists out there which we haven't quite seen yet. And just a very quick note about Groudon. Now, I had a lovely email this past week from somebody who won a state championship, actually. It was, and if I can find the name here quickly, Charles Randall Larner's Leech, who won Missouri Stakes last week with Donphan, saying he had a positive matchup against Toad-based decks. Now, I should point out here that I suppose the way I want to put it is, there's always variance. Now, what he actually said was, if you examine the specific results a little better, you would have seen I ran a 1-1 line of Primal Groudon EX. And that is basically, and he also included a YouTube link to watch me, so I can watch him 2-0 Seismitoad Jinx. If I remember, I will tweet that out because it's a lovely video. I love seeing Seismitoad go down. Now, I had analysed the results, and I did know that this chap played a 1-1 Groudon line. So I suppose I want to clarify my comments, and then I want to talk about Groudon. First of all, I stand by what I said last week about Donphan being a bad play for stakes because it has a bad Toad matchup. But I suppose what I'm saying is I was talking specifically about the Speed Donphan decks, which have been gaining prominence from what I'd seen. What this chap had done was essentially playing a brilliant Donphan variant with a 1-1 Groudon, Primal Groudon line. Now, playing a 1-1 line has all kinds of problems, with consistency and prizes and stuff like that. But clearly this didn't have an impact at Missouri Stakes when he managed to go and win the entire tournament. And I completely agree with what he said. This is a genius move. As soon as you evolve up to Primal Groudon, your energy cannot be knocked off by Seismitoad. Crushing Hammer, Enhanced Hammer is doing nothing. They cannot bring it active from the bench using Lysandra because of the Omega Barrier. And they cannot play any Hypnotoxic Laser. Now, there is going to be one turn minimum between benching Groudon EX and Primal evolving it, during which time they can, of course, Lysandra up and all of that. But the problem is they've actually got to Lysandra up, and that's a huge problem. Because they've got to have the Lysandra that turn, and then they've got to keep it in the active. Now, Primal Groudon does have a retreat cost. I believe it's something like 4. It's a huge retreat cost. So this is a problem against Seismitoad, because they can potentially bring it active, and then you're not going to be able to retreat it. Because you can't use Floatstone, and you can't use Switch. So that is potentially a problem. However, even if they Lysandra it, you Primal Evolve it, and they're doing 30, maybe 50 a turn. You can still be attaching energy, they can't laser you, and you're going to KO the Toad. Worst case scenario, you trade 2 prizes for 2 prizes. Best case scenario, you run through their deck. Because here's the thing with Primal Groudon, it does 200 damage. It's going to run through Toads quickly. Without laser, they are 5-hit KOing it. So there is that one turn where you're vulnerable, and you could still end up drawing dead while you're trainer locked. But other than that, I agree. So I suppose what I'm saying is, firstly, thank you very much for the email. I love getting, and it was a really detailed email with links and a link to the list and a link to the video. And, if he is listening, he says he's a fan of the show. Thank you very much for the email. Absolutely fascinating, very detailed. Love these kind of emails. But I suppose it just highlights the variance in the game at the moment. I don't think Speed Donphan is good against Seismitoad. This deck is a little bit slower. But it doesn't matter that it's a little bit slower. It's got Primal Groudon. And after I got this email, I got to thinking about other matchups with this deck. And if you're playing in the mirror, you stick up Primal Groudon, what are they going to do? I mean, yes, obviously they can hide behind robo substitutes, but if you can hit Lissandras or catchers, then you're going to be running through Donphans and they're going to be crying, and it's not going to go very well for them. You go up against something like, actually Virizion Genesect is already a positive matchup, but let's say you go against something like Kyogre, which would be a very bad matchup for Donphan. You stick up your Groudon and you can take out 2 Primal Kyogres before they can kill you. Now, I should point out that Primal Kyogre's attack would still do 30 to you on the bench without a Mr. Mime, but you can just play a Mr. Mime. Now, you need to build the Donphan deck differently, and that's why I discounted this last week. The other thing I should mention, this is something I've said on the podcast a little bit before, is the fact that we've got to be careful with states. There are a lot of state championships. And this was why I didn't dismiss Donphan, Koga and Groudon last week on Metal. They all won 1 state each. But you've got to be careful with state championships, because if one person wins a state and it's only 1 win, then maybe that person got lucky, maybe they had a really good list, maybe they had good matchups, maybe they're just an exceptional player. But it doesn't really show you the start of a trend. And this really needs to be the last thing I say about Donphan today, because this has been a very heavily Donphan influenced podcast. I apologise for nothing, just so we're clear. But when it comes to this Donphan list with Primal Groudon, I love it. It's a different list, and I suppose this kind of list, I think maybe, in fact, well, not maybe, I think this probably is a better play for states. I love the Speed Donphan because I love the simplicity of it, and it takes me back to Nationals a few years ago. I like the simplicity and the speed of it, but let's face it, in any deck, if you get a 1-1 Primal Groudon setup, you're going to win. Now, just so we're clear, and I've said this on my YouTube channel, if you're running a Groudon deck and you just get 1-1-1 Groudon up, then you're going to lose. But in something like a Donphan deck, where you're doing your general Donphan spinning, turning into robo substitutes, oh yeah, and I've got a 1-1 Groudon as well. That's what I mean. Even if the Groudon goes down, you've still got your Donphans. The last thing I will say about this, make sure you test something like this, because there's decisions like when to bench the Groudon and how to do your energy attachments and when to start attacking a Groudon that you really need to play the game and get a feel for rather than just run straight into it. So thank you to Charles for that email, incredibly interesting email. I've gotten a lot more emails this week since I read some out last week. I don't know if that's a coincidence or not. But if you got emails, chuck them my way at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk. I love getting your emails. Thank you very much to Charles. And I suppose I should say, congratulations for winning Missouri Stakes and with Donphan. Donphan will always be one of my very favourite Pokemon. And whenever I see anyone doing well with Donphan, it just makes me incredibly happy. Although I say that, now when I see people doing well with Flareon, it makes me incredibly jealous, so maybe I'm just a little bit inconsistent. Now, the last thing I suppose we need to talk about today is new ways to play Virizion Genesect. Now, this very much intrigued me because it's something I never really thought about. You think about Virizion Genesect, and it's been around for a while, and it's one world and all of that, and when it comes down to Virizion Genesect, it's very much a case of everybody knows how it works. And Virizion Genesect has always been a deck that's had a little bit more space in. So you could, some decks have played it with, some decks have played it with lasers, and some have played it with bats, and some have played it with Raichu, or Beartic, or hammers, or whatever. But everyone's played the same kind of list. Now, there are 2 lists this past weekend which I absolutely loved having a look at. And one came from Yeovil Regionals. My friend Ben decided to play Virizion Genesect with Mew and Dimension Valley. Dimension Valley, of course, being a stadium that brings the attacks down by 1 colourless energy for all psychic Pokemon. And Mew basically having an ability whereby he can copy the attacks of any Pokemon on the field, although do keep a lookout for Silent Lab, which will turn this off, and I know some people at the weekend were playing Silent Lab. And this was genius, because that way you bench a Virizion, and then you pop a Mew, and with 1 energy and Dimension Valley in play, you can then use Emerald Slash with Mew. Now, this is good if you're going against psychic weak Pokemon, but it's also good because you can essentially have a turn 1 Emerald Slash, or an Emerald Slash when you've got no energy on the field. And of course, if you've got any energy on the field, if you've got 2 energy on the field, you can use Emerald Slash. If you haven't got 2 energy, that's a problem. Not with Mew. Now, I still don't think this is amazing, and it's a little bit clunky, and Ben did well at the tournament, but didn't make top 8. It's a bit clunky, and you need the Mew and the Virizion and the Dimension Valley, and you've got the problems with Silent Lab and Muse 120 HP and gets KO'd easily, etc. But it's still ingenious. The other thing, which I should point out, this isn't just for something like Emerald Slash, because Mew can be using Megalo Cannon for 2 energy. 100 damage, 20 to the bench, for just 2 energy if you've got a Dimension Valley out. So, interesting take. The other interesting take was a chap who, I believe they came second at one of the stakes, I forget which one, I do apologise, with Illumine's Genesect. Now, Illumise, or however you want to pronounce it, is from Primal Clash, and it's got 70 HP, and it's got an attack for 1 grass energy, which allows you to search for 1 basic energy and attach to one of your bench Pokemon. It's basically half of an Emerald Slash. It takes 1 energy to do it, not 2, but it only allows you to attach 1 energy to the bench, not 2. It's half an Emerald Slash. And it can be done on turn 1. And it helps against Seismitoad decks who are going to be using Crushing Hammer. Because they can either Crushing Hammer the Illumise, in which case you can just attach again the next turn, or they can Crushing Hammer the bench Pokemon, but then you can attach to the bench Pokemon while you use Helping Hand with Illumise the following turn. Now, this seems like a faster, less powerful version of Virizion Genesect, but I've told you about Toad a lot in the last few weeks, and I'm talking about the speed decks today, and maybe this is the kind of thing that's needed. Certainly it went very well indeed. So, a couple of different ways that I play Virizion Genesect. Now, I'm not entirely sure either of these are better than your traditional Virizion Genesect, but certainly they're interesting, and as I do a lot of the time on the podcast, I'm giving you ideas. You can run with them, you can test them, or you can ignore them. Or, like me, you can just go, oh, that's kind of cool, but I'm never going to have time to test these kind of things in a huge amount of detail. Now, the last thing I want to mention today is, I suppose, revisiting the Seismitoad debate, and I'm only going to do this very, very quickly. But we talked about Seismitoad last week, and I told you about how it is the best deck in the format, and I still believe that, and how it struggles for good counters. And I talked about the emails I've had this past week. I've had a bunch of emails specifically about countering Seismitoad. My emails are unfortunately playing up as I record this, which is annoying, because no other website is. Damn you, Outlook.com. But there was one lovely chap who sent me a Word document with a load of, something like 20 different counters to Seismitoad. Now, most of them were stage 1s and a little bit clunky and hard to use, but it was a very nice list indeed. Now, the one I came up with was Cobalion EX, and if I played Seismitoad Excadrill, I was going to play a single Cobalion EX, so that in the mirror, if I didn't get the better start and get going, what I would be able to do would be to actually just stick up Cobalion and get rid of their double colourless energy, which I thought was quite funky. And obviously I've told you about the email from Charles telling me about the 1-1 Groudon line in his Donphan list, which countered Seismitoad very, very nicely. Rough Seas is a fantastic Seismitoad counter, which I know sounds a little bit roundabout, but remember that Seismitoad is generally doing less damage than other decks. So, you know, something like a Manectric deck against a Seismitoad deck, yeah, you both get to Rough Seas, but you're healing the same amount of damage, and you're dishing out more damage, which is kind of key at this stage. You know, it's very, I suppose it goes in your favour. Yeah, you both get to use it, but you get to use it more, and you get to use it better, and that's kind of funky. Kyogre, as previously mentioned, very good Seismitoad counter. Seismitoad struggles to do much of anything against it. Yeah, they can hit heads on laser and they can poison you and all of that. But remember that you're moving, with a Kyogre, you've got 4 energy on it. You can move 2 to the bench and then retreat the Kyogre and just double attach the following turn, which is going to be very nice indeed. And after all of this, and after all the things people have told me, Metal also, I mentioned this last week, Metal decks are very good counters to Virizion Genesect, because you can use Steel Shouter to get rid of the poison damage, and you can use Bronzong to get around the Crushing Hammers, and you can be doing a fair amount of damage, and you can use things like Cobalion EX to get rid of their DCE, or you can use Cobalion to I think it's Iron Breaker and stop the Seismitoad attacking the following turn. So, these are quite good, but at the end of the day, nothing's going to beat VirGen Genesect. And there were some VirGen Genesects out at Yeovil this past weekend, and one of them took down the entire tournament. People keep saying that VirGen Genesect is dead, just like people kept saying that Darkrai decks were dead. It's going to take a lot to kill VirGen Genesect. And maybe Rayquaza and Mega Rayquaza will finally do it, but let's face it, we've been saying that for a long time now. Remember when Pyro was going to make VirGen unplayable? How'd that work out? Things to think about, and that I suppose has been the theme of today's podcast. Lots of interesting stuff to think about. Very few, dynamite conclusions, and I suppose that's really where we are. We're at that lovely stage in the format where we know what's good, but lists are changing and evolving, and people are metagaming, and it's all a little bit roundabout. A week ago, we couldn't conceive of anything other than Seismitoad winning. This week, there's plenty of people going and winning with stuff that isn't Seismitoad. So, things to think about then. As always, make sure you check out my YouTube channel. Just search PTCG Radio on YouTube. And make sure that you subscribe if you haven't already. Make sure that you follow me on Twitter @TheWassy and tweet me if you've got any thoughts. And if you want to send me any longer thoughts, you can email me at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk. That'll do it for this week. I shall be back next week with more states discussion and all kinds of fun things like that. As always, thank you very much for listening. My name's Ross, and you've been listening to PTCG Radio.